Ready to dive into something kind of heavy. Morality.
Mm.
And how it's changed so much over time. It's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so picture this. Medieval Europe, right? You're accused of something awful, and you got to do a trial by boiling water.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, I know. You just stick your arm in a cauldron of boiling water to grab something. Sounds awful, but, and this is crazy, the survival rate, like 60%.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Huh.
People then were positive about God's judgment. If you were guilty, you were terrified of, like, divine wrath, so you'd confess to avoid the pain. But if you were innocent, you believed in divine protection and would totally go for it.
It's kind of like how intertwined everything was back then,
Yeah.
Law, morality, religion, it all mixed together.
Totally. And you know what? That's what we are going to unpack today. We're tracing the evolution of morality from the very beginning, like from our earliest ancestors to today, and maybe even take a peek at the future.
Sounds ambitious.
It is. And our guide is Hanno Sauer and his book, The Invention of Good and Evil.
Sauer's approach is really something. He brings in evolution, cognitive science, anthropology. He wants to understand why we think the way we do about right and wrong and why it's changed.
It's a real deep dive, for sure. So let's go way back to our ancestors on the African savanna.
Okay.
Can you imagine a world where every single day is a fight to survive? Sauer says that's where human morality was born.
It makes sense though, right? Back then, you needed your group to survive. Finding food, fighting off predators, everything. So naturally, your morals would be all about protecting your own.
Right, because one person alone,
Yeah.
no chance against a woolly mammoth.
Exactly.
But here's where Sauer throws a curveball. He calls early humans inwardly family-centric pacifists, but outwardly gangs of murderers and plunderers.
Whoa.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
It seems like a contradiction, but it actually makes sense when you think about the context. To survive back then, you had to be fiercely loyal to your group and totally ruthless towards outsiders. It was all about ensuring the survival of your genes and, by extension, your morals, too.
It's a wild thought, isn't it? That the things that helped us survive back then are so different from how we think about things today.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of who we are comes from that deep down instinct to protect our own.
It's like a puzzle, right? Figuring out how we went from those small groups to, well, everything we have now. Sauer says it's not just about the rules, but how we make sure people follow them.
Enforcement.
Yeah, and some of the examples from history. Let's just say they were creative with punishments back then.
Oh, yeah. Think about that bronze bowl thing.
Brutal.
Brutal doesn't even cover it. But here's the thing. Sauer says those punishments, as crazy as they sound now, might have actually helped us become more, well, civilized.
Wait, what? You're saying those punishments made us better?
It's called self-domestication.
Yeah.
Imagine, over time, the most aggressive people are, well, they're out of the picture.
Okay.
So the result, humanity as a whole gets a bit calmer, a bit more tolerant. We kind of domesticated ourselves.
Like we're the friendly Labrador retrievers, and chimps are still the wolves.
Exactly. And just like those dogs, we can hang out in bigger groups without, tearing each other apart.
That's a trip. So our ancestors' bad behavior, it's like it paved the way for us to be good.
In a way.
Wild. But we can't talk about morality without talking about culture, right?
It's huge. Sauer actually compares it to, get this, scientific progress.
How so?
Think about it. It's not one massive discovery. It's tons of tiny ones, all building up over generations.
Like a slow burn.
Exactly. And Sauer gives this really interesting example about the Catholic Church, how they changed things up a bit.
Okay, I'm listening.
So about 500 years ago, they started making these reforms. And I mean, they weren't about morality directly, but they ended up changing how people saw right and wrong. It's pretty wild.
What kind of reforms?
Well, they banned cousin marriage, which back then was pretty common, kept wealth in the family,
Makes sense.
Right. And they also messed with inheritance laws, gave people more freedom to pick who they wanted to marry and what happened to their stuff after they died.
So it really shook things up.
Totally. And one thing it did was shift things from a shame-based morality to a more guilt-based one.
Okay, hold on. What's the difference? Shame versus guilt.
So shame, it's all about what will people think. You're worried about your family, your community.
Right.
But guilt, that's all internal. It's about your sense of right and wrong, even if nobody else knows what you did.
Deep stuff. But how do we know these reforms actually did that?
Sauer points to this thing called the Italian difference. It turns out that even today, people in parts of Italy that were under stricter church control 500 years ago, They donate blood more, even if they're not religious.
Get out.
It's true. So this echo from the past.
But blood donation, though. Why that?
Right. You'd think shame would make you donate more to look good.
Yeah.
But Sauer says guilt makes you do good things even when nobody's watching. It's about what you believe, not what others think.
Wow, that's deep. So even centuries later, those changes are still shaping how we act.
Exactly. It shows how these big shifts in thinking, they had this ripple effect. But here's the thing, that shift toward individualism, it wasn't just some random thing that happened. It changed everything.
How so?
Think about it, individualism. That's the foundation for, like, democracy, capitalism, even the scientific revolution. All of those systems, they need us to trust each other, to believe in individual rights and all that.
It's all connected.
Exactly. One little change in how we see ourselves, and bam, history takes a detour. It shows how powerful moral evolution is, you know. But Sauer says even with all that progress, things are a little dicey right now. He actually calls it morality boiling over.
Morality boiling over. Okay, that's like officially got my attention. A little too close to those boiling water trials or anything. But seriously, what's he getting at?
So we were talking about individualism, right? How that's been like this huge force for progress and everything. Well, Sauer's point is that individualistic spirit, it's kind of coming back to bite us.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, we're all about me, myself, and I, and sometimes it feels like we've lost that sense of, we're all in this together.
That's it. And the way we talk about morality these days, it's not helping. Everything's black and white. Us versus them. Oppressors and oppressed.
Right.
And that kind of talk, it just ramps up the pressure, like that pot of water getting hotter and hotter.
And we know how that ends. Things boil over, people start pointing fingers, taking sides. It's like we can't escape that tribal instinct, even when we think we're so civilized.
Exactly. We think we're so different from those guys on the savannah, but that fear of the other, it's still there, just below the surface. Sauer uses the example of the Holocaust, which is, well, it's a stark reminder of how bad things can get when that fear takes over.
It's terrifying, honestly. So, are we doomed to repeat history? Is there any way out of this mess?
Sauer doesn't think so. He's actually kind of hopeful. He keeps coming back to this idea that humans, we're hardwired for cooperation, for empathy. That's how we made it this far, right? From the savannah to, well, all of this. What we need to do now is remember that. Tap back into those, those better parts of ourselves.
It's like choosing hope, right? Because I got to believe that deep down, most people, we want the same things. We want connection. We want to feel safe. We want to belong.
Without a doubt. It's about finding that balance. You know, the individual and the group. That's the sweet spot.
Not easy, that's for sure. But hey, we've gone through a lot as a species. So there you have it. A whirlwind tour of morality. From boiling water to blood donations.
Yeah.
From self-domestication to, well, hopefully not self-destruction. Big thanks to Hanno Sauer and his book, The Invention of Good and Evil. It's a wild ride, folks. If you want more, definitely check it out. And keep those big questions coming, because this conversation, it's far from over. Till next time, keep exploring, keep thinking, and keep diving deep.